Hi, I'm Alycia Hargraves, and I will be presenting on the topic of Signals Notebook in a GxP validated environment. So for the agenda today, I wanted to spend some time talking more about myself and my role in relation to the topic of Signals Notebook in a validated environment, and then kind of delve more into the project of, why did we implement this new ELN for our organization, kind of quickly go through our approach to validating the notebook, the resulting changes from that, and then spend more time focused on the maintenance of the Signals notebook in a validated environment, GxP specifically, and then just end with some learnings that we've had from our experience in this project. So jumping right in again, I am Alycia Hargraves. I am an IT manager at Eli Lilly, and I've been there for over 8 years. In my time there, I have been supporting multiple laboratory information management systems through their life cycles. And in my current role, I am supporting electronic lab notebooks in the Lilly Research Laboratories, also known as LRL, where our organization is focused on working on the development and discovery of medicines. So in that role, I function as an IT technical SME and system custodian for the ELNs. And what that basically means is that I work kind of as a middleman between the business and IT to really understand, what those business needs are so that we can bring in the right technologies for those needs. And then also understanding really those, technically the configuration of those systems and ensuring that they're properly developed, deployed, supported, maintained, and validated. So in relation to my role with this project and being responsible, for these ELN systems, that brings us around to, why were we bringing in a new electronic lab notebook, specifically Signals notebook? And to answer that, I think we have to go back a few years, right, where we did have an electronic lab notebook, but it was over 2 decades old. And so with this aging system, aging technology, it was reaching end of life at this point. And so what we needed to do was work on coming up with a new solution to support our GxP needs, right? The old one was just basically no longer efficiently meeting the needs that we had. So again, the new solution needed to be GxP validated, as well as replace our aging technology. So we needed those industry-leading technologies. From a business perspective, we needed it to meet our evolving scientific needs. And because we have business users around the globe, it needed to have a geographic reach. Also, with the integrations we had on our current ELN, we wanted our new ELN to also be able to support those same integrations moving forward. And then the final point I have here is really about having a solution that would be user-friendly and intuitive to our users, have that, vendor support, little minimal downtime, and ultimately by having those pieces, we would have less internal needed IT support that would free up capacity there. So now that we had our purpose and scope to the project, bringing this new ELN to our organization for our scientists, we went into, of course, implementing it, making sure that we validated it properly for our GxP standards, right? So to do that, we went through our system development lifecycle, those pieces from design all the way to deployment. And to do that, we had these 5 environments here to support that process. So starting from the top and focusing on the right side with the testing, we had Sandbox, and I called this our Wild West of testing. It was important for us to be able to play around with the different features, get an understanding of what configurations were going to work for our different groups, workflows, what do we want to enable, what we don't want to enable, what will we use. So it was a great place to kind of have that playground, right, of testing. Once we had an understanding of the features that we wanted to move forward with in configuration, we moved into the dev environment. That's where we completed our informal testing. So we drafted test scripts, did our informal testing, and when everything was good and signed off there, we moved into our QA environment. That's where we did all of our formal testing, completed it, got it approved. And once all the signatures was signed off on that, we were able to officially move all of our formal configuration into production, as well as our training environment for our users. And so that's how we handled testing through those 5 environments. On the left, I really wanted to spend some time focusing on how the releases from Revity were kind of released, to our different environments. So starting from the top, when you look at the sandbox environment, it was on what's called a standard release. So on a standard release, these are basically the releases that Revity is putting out every, I would say, a month to about a month and a half. So it's getting the latest and greatest features, which is great for the sandbox because that's where we want to get a chance to test everything up front. That's opposed to our dev, QA, and production environments, which we have on what we call deferred release scheduling. So that means that instead of getting a release every month to a month and a half, we're getting releases about every 3 to 4 months. And basically, these are like a bundle of 3 to 4 different standard releases all in one. And this scheduling wise for maintaining Signals Notebook, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into maintenance. And so that's kind of the different levels of how versions are released to those environments. So once implementation was complete, our users were onboarded. We had a lot of really cool, positive changes from that, right? Going back to having that less IT internal support, we were able to see a result of that through our trouble tickets that our IT support team was receiving. So on our old system, we were averaging about more than 90 tickets a month, right? And when we moved into our Signals notebook, we saw an 80% decrease to about an average of 10 tickets a month. And so I think that really spoke to having a solution that was more intuitive for our users, and that helped free up that capacity for our IT support by having, less tickets. From the technology perspective, we moved our from the old solution that was Oracle database, client base installed on those individual laptops to a SaaS cloud solution through Signals Notebook. So now we're giving our users more accessibility and mobility to be able to access Signals from a browser, whether that's on your laptop, maybe a lab PC, or even a tablet, right? On the notebook creation, we moved from, with our old ELN, from a multi-step process where users would have to submit requests to IT to create a new notebook, right? And then instead, now in this new solution, we have put the power in our users' hands so that anytime they need a notebook to be created, they can create it themselves, right? As long as they have access to Signals. And then the last one that I wanted to point out was our change management process. So in the past with the old ELN system, upgrades from our vendor, and by the time that we received them, they were so large that when we really looked at the impact to testing, it was so extensive that you're looking at about 1 to 2 years to complete that, versus in Signals, we're receiving that deferred release and getting through, 3 to 4 upgrades throughout the year. So really great improvements in some of our processes there. And so on that topic of change management by having these deferred releases, this was a big key component for being able to be successful and keeping our system validated, right? So the deferred release, again, is a release every 3 to 4 months that we're receiving from Revity for the notebook, and it's bundling these standard releases that just came out. And our standard releases, if you recall, are being released in our sandbox. So as we are receiving those standard releases, we are having, excuse me, conversations with our change control board, our validation teams and quality, and we're sharing these features with them. And then what we do is we actually keep a place where we document these features and ask the questions that you see here, right, about each one of those features. For example, if there is a feature that is more so an enhancement, then we may need to ask the question about regression testing. Do we require any of that? Or if it's a new feature, do we need system testing, new requirements? When our business users are working on test or acceptance testing. So it's important to evaluate things about the testing needs, as well as impact to, our training and validation documentation. So we ask questions like you see here, as well as many others for every single one of those features in the standard releases. And what that does for us is basically help us kind of get that pre-work done ahead of time, and have those activities needed for a deferred release already set out and scheduled before we receive the deferred release in our dev and QA environments. And then just to point out here, with us being able to work on, the impact analysis ahead of time, we can go ahead and draft test scripts and documentation as well. We're communicating with our partners, validations, and these change control boards, as well as these weekly stand-ups. So a continuous conversation about what's going on. And for example, if there's any questions about the features or we need a demo, we can leverage our partnership with Revity to bring those resources in to complete that evaluation. So on the other side of the maintenance, I would say kind of a coin, you have the deferred release, but then we also have what we call post-deferred release. And this is basically that time right after the deferred release is done, where we use it to implement different business requests. So some background, we allow for our users at any point that they want. We have a location where they can submit requests to our IT team about maybe a configuration change, a template change, something with integration, and they can go ahead and say, hey, here's what we're looking at, here's what we see, here's how important it is, priority, things like that. And so our team on a reoccurring basis will take those requests that we're receiving from our users and make a determination of 3 things basically, which would be, one, is it already on Revity's roadmap and is coming down that pipeline? Or 2, is it a feature to be implemented by Revity's team that we should put in the ideas portal and vote on, or check that it's already there and vote on it, right? Or 3rd, is it something that our Lilly IT team can actually implement for them? It's like a configuration change or template updates as well. So then we use that time there to go ahead and implement that for them. So you'll have your, again, deferred release, and then right after that, you would see us implement those changes, like those template changes and integrations right after. So this is a good way to not only make sure that they're getting the latest and greatest features from Revity, but then of course, we're still meeting their business needs by configuring signals accordingly to what they need with the features that we have now. So after all of that is said and done, we've done our implementation. We're in maintenance mode, keeping signals validated with these deferred releases and post-deferred releases every 3 to 4 months, right? We actually learned, I think, a ton in continuing to get a better, well-oiled machine so that we're not as stressed about that time frame, right? And I tried to bundle it all into 5 that I think are really important and have been instrumental in making sure that we're meeting that deadline of when the deferred release is going to be pushed out to our production system. And so the first one would be early evaluation and testing. That's key. And you heard me talk about that with maintenance, with the standard releases. That was definitely the key component because that takes a lot of pressure off of trying to do an impact analysis and assessment of what you need. From a validation and testing and requirements, right? When you know you have that deferred release coming out soon, versus, hey, we've already been doing it for the past 3 months. And as soon as the deferred release is available, we can go ahead and start our change management process because we know what's coming, right? The second point being to just communicate often. And I mean that on two levels, right? So I think with implementing signals, it was important to, have those daily stand-ups, but don't stop there. You're still needing to get out your deferred releases. So you need to also communicate often, whether, you're telling them about the standard releases that are coming, new features, different configuration changes. Those are the things you want to communicate with your team and get that feedback from quality and validation and security and legal. So communicate with your team there, but also make sure that your team is built out in a way so that it's also being communicated internally to your group. So if there are changes in your organization that may impact signals, you can be better prepared knowing that you have, like us, a deferred release schedule and a post release schedule. So it's just really helpful in keeping, I think, a solid and not get your project plan too crazy. The third point being prioritize. It sounds really simple, but it's really important to prioritize because, like with anything, life happens. There are going to be times where you have competing, maybe high priority projects that come up. And so it'll be important to know which of those features that you're getting ready to release are high priority and see, maybe there are some that are less priority and some that you may not even be planning to enable. And so to help again with project planning, resources, capacity, and things like that, it's really helpful to also be able to prioritize so that you can be more flexible in your change process if something else comes up. And you can always deploy those features maybe later in your post-deferred release like we spoke about before. The fourth point would be to build support spaces. This is really good because it also helps with reducing that IT support because you are building user communities. So for example, this could be a team site or a SharePoint site where there are these common or frequently asked questions that you can point users to, right? And then another way to do that for us, as an example, is we use our power users. So power users are like a step up above standard users. So they can do everything a standard user can do, but they have these elevated privileges. So it could be like a senior scientist. And so users in that, maybe that group or department can go to the power users of that area, ask those questions to them first. And that's like your first tier of support for your users and build that community. And then if there's something, major or issue that's wrong, then they can go up to another tier and contact the IT team if there is another, like a more serious issue going on. And then the final point, the fifth one, is to have a backup plan. As much as you do your best to evaluate early and prioritize and communicate, right? Again, because things can happen on the fly, especially if you're like ready to go, you think everything's good for validation, and maybe there's an issue with the document that you thought was going to be approved in time, but it didn't. It didn't make it through, or maybe something with the feature had an issue, so testing ran a little longer. So your schedule's not quite lining up. It's really important to have a backup plan for what are you going to do in those cases. Bring in people like, legal and quality, your security group, so you can talk about what do we do in these situations. For example, it could be something that's low risk, and you may have a discussion about, is it a feature that maybe you can just choose to disable for a time? Or is it something that's so major that you need to figure out how to remove user access for a limited time, maybe a few hours to a day. And so if you have a backup plan ahead of time, that better helps your team know which plan to enact, and then it helps you to better prepare your users as well for what to expect. So as much as we want things to run smoothly, we all know life happens, so it's really good to just have backup plans to better prepare you. And that is all for my learnings, and what I wanted to share about really just implementing, but then maintaining Signals Notebook in a GxP environment, the things that have worked for us that we have learned. I would just like to thank you all for taking the time to join and hear me today. Also want to take time to thank the Revity team for inviting me to speak on this topic. And of course, a big thanks to my Lilly team for all of their help, support, partnership with deploying Signals, maintaining it, and figuring out just how to make it better and better. So thank you all.